Maple Street. It was the kind of place where you could still smell the freshly cut grass on a Saturday morning, where the mailman knew every dog by name. It was a postcard from a simpler time, nestled deep in the heart of suburban Ohio. And in the middle of it all, in a tidy little house with a perfectly manicured lawn, lived Mr. Roberts. He was a fixture, as reliable as the setting sun, always a wave, always a friendly smile. He was the kind of neighbor everyone wished they had, the one who'd bring your trash cans in if you forgot, or offer a helping hand with a heavy grocery bag, just a nice, quiet man. He lived alone, a retired accountant, he said, kept to himself mostly, but in a friendly way. You'd see him tending his prize-winning roses or sitting on his porch swing with a glass of lemonade, watching the world go by. The kids in the neighborhood knew him as the man with the endless supply of hard candies in a crystal bowl just inside his front door. He was part of the scenery, a comfortable, predictable part of life in Fairview. No one ever had a reason to think twice about him. After all, why would they? He was just Mr. Roberts, the friendly old man from number 214. The rhythm of the neighborhood was slow, steady, reassuring. Block parties in the summer, trick-or-treating in the fall, life unfolded with a gentle certainty. Mr. Roberts was always there, a quiet participant in the background of it all. He'd contribute a casserole to the potluck, his own special recipe, he'd say with a wink. He was woven into the very fabric of the community, a thread no one ever thought to pull. He was safe. He was familiar. He was one of them, or so they all believed, in that peaceful suburban dream. And in that dream, no one could have imagined the darkness that lurked behind those neatly trimmed hedges, behind that welcoming front door. No one could have conceived that the gentle smile they saw every single day was a carefully constructed mask, hiding a chilling secret. The truth was a monster, and it was living right there on Maple Street, patiently waiting. Because in a place as peaceful as Fairview, you never expect the monster to be your neighbor. You just don't, not until it's far, far too late. Her name was Melissa Harper, a nurse, 26 years old with a laugh that could fill a room and a future that seemed just as bright. She was the responsible one, the one her parents never had to worry about. She worked the late shift at the county hospital, a demanding job she loved. Melissa was a creature of habit. After her shift, she'd call her mom just to say goodnight every single night. It was their ritual, a small connection that meant the world. But on a Tuesday night in late October, the phone never rang. Silence, a deep, unsettling silence. Her mother, Susan, felt it first, a knot of dread tightening in her stomach. It wasn't like Melissa, not at all. She called her daughter's phone, straight to voicemail. She called again, and again. By morning the dread had blossomed into full-blown panic. Susan drove to Melissa's apartment, her heart pounding against her ribs. The car was in its designated spot. The front door was locked. Inside, everything seemed normal. Her purse was on the kitchen counter, her keys right beside it. But Melissa was gone, vanished into thin air. The community, shaken from its slumber, sprang into action. Fairview was a small town, and one of their own was missing. Flyers with Melissa's smiling face were plastered on every telephone pole, in every storefront window. Volunteers, strangers and friends alike, organized search parties. They combed through the local parks, the dense woods that bordered the town, calling her name until their voices were hoarse. They were a sea of hopeful faces, a determined army trying to will her back home. They were neighbors helping neighbors, a testament to the town's tight-knit spirit, and among them, a familiar face, Mr. Roberts. He was there, handing out bottles of water to the search teams, offering words of comfort to worried residents. He looked just as concerned as everyone else, his brow furrowed with worry. He'd shake his head and say how terrible it all was, how he hoped they'd find that poor girl soon. He played his part perfectly, another worried citizen in a town gripped by fear. No one saw the predator hiding in plain sight. He was just another volunteer, another friendly face in the crowd. Days turned into a week, then two. The yellow ribbons tied around the old oak trees on Maple Street began to fade. The hope that had burned so brightly now flickered, a fragile flame against a cold wind of despair. The police were working around the clock, chasing down every lead, but each one led to a dead end. Melissa Harper had simply disappeared. It was as if the earth had swallowed her whole. The case was growing colder by the minute, and a chilling question began to hang in the autumn air. Was this something more sinister than a simple missing person case? The detectives were frustrated. They had interviewed everyone in Melissa's life. Friends, co-workers, ex-boyfriends. They had reviewed hours of security footage from near her apartment and the hospital. Nothing. It was a blank slate. They decided to widen their net, to re-interview people in the community, even those with the most tangential connections. It was a long shot, a fishing expedition, but they were desperate. They started going door to door again, this time on the streets surrounding the park where Melissa sometimes jogged. Streets like Maple. And that's when they knocked on Mr. Roberts' door. He was just as polite and cooperative as he had been with the volunteer search parties. He invited the two detectives inside, offered them coffee. He spoke about how tragic it all was, how the neighborhood hadn't been the same since she went missing. He seemed genuinely sad. The detectives were about to wrap up their questions, another dead end, another name to check off the list. But then, as they were turning to leave, Mr. Roberts said something odd. An offhand comment that made the hairs on the back of their necks stand up. "I do hope you find her," he said, his voice soft, almost wistful. "It's a shame her scrubs weren't a brighter color. Blue is so hard to see in the dark." The detectives froze. They exchanged a look. How could he know that? The detail about the color of Melissa's scrubs hadn't been released to the public. Only the police, her family, and the person who was with her that night would know she was wearing blue. It was a slip, a tiny, almost imperceptible crack in the perfect facade, and in that moment the entire investigation shifted. It was no longer a search, it was a hunt. That one sentence changed everything. Blue scrubs. The detectives left Mr. Roberts' house that day with a new, singular focus. The friendly neighbor from Maple Street was no longer just a witness. He was a person of interest, a prime suspect. They needed more than a strange comment, though. They needed evidence. They began digging, quietly at first, into the life of the retired accountant. They pulled his records, checked his background, looked for any little thing that seemed out of place. And they started watching him. A subtle, round-the-clock surveillance on the man in the tidy house with the prize-winning roses. The first real break came from the most mundane of places. The trash. On collection day, before the garbage truck made its rounds, detectives retrieved the bags Mr. Roberts had left at his curb. Sifting through coffee grounds and junk mail, they found it. A small, laminated card, slightly bent, but still readable. It was a hospital ID. And the smiling face looking back at them was Melissa Harper's. It was the concrete link they had been searching for, the kind of evidence that could get them a search warrant. The kind of evidence that could blow this case wide open. With the warrant in hand, they didn't wait. A team of officers descended on 214 Maple Street. This time, they didn't knock politely. They breached the door. Inside, the house was just as the detectives remembered, clean, orderly, almost sterile, but they weren't interested in the living room. They headed straight for the basement. The door was at the back of the kitchen, locked with a heavy-duty deadbolt. An unusual level of security for an ordinary basement. They broke it open and were met with the smell of bleach and something else. Something metallic and foul. What they found down there was a scene from a nightmare. The concrete floor had been scrubbed, but faint stains were still visible under a blacklight. On a workbench they found a collection of tools neatly arranged, but it was a small wooden chest in the corner that held the most damning secrets. Inside were trophies. A driver's license belonging to a woman who had vanished a decade earlier from a nearby town. A necklace matching the description of one worn by another missing person. And tucked away at the bottom, a set of fingerprints carefully lifted from a glass and preserved on a card. They belonged to Melissa Harper. The quiet neighbor was a monster. Who was Mr. Roberts? The man the neighborhood knew was a fiction, a carefully crafted character he had played for more than 20 years. As detectives unraveled his past, the story became darker than anyone could have imagined. His real name wasn't Roberts, it was Arthur Finch. He wasn't a retired accountant from Columbus. He was a former hospital orderly from Pennsylvania who had disappeared in the late 1990s, right around the time a young woman near his hometown had gone missing, a case that had long since gone cold. He had simply walked away from his old life and created a new one. He had moved to Fairview, Ohio for a reason. Anonymity. He chose a town where no one knew him, where he could blend in, become invisible. He picked a quiet street, a modest house, and began to build his cover story, brick by painstaking brick. He was methodical, patient. He learned the rhythms of his neighbors, their routines, their habits. He became the friendly, harmless old man, a role he played with chilling perfection. He used his manufactured persona as a shield, a cloak of normalcy that allowed him to move through the world without suspicion, hiding the predatory darkness that churned within him. His deception was total. He had fooled everyone. The neighbors who waved to him every day, the children who took candy from his crystal bowl, the search party volunteers he had worked alongside. He had exploited their trust, their belief in the goodness of their community. He used their kindness as a weapon against them. The man they thought they knew, the man they had welcomed into their lives, simply did not exist. He was a ghost, a phantom who had constructed a life out of lies, all to hide the horrifying truth of what he was. The investigation revealed that his methods were terrifyingly simple. He was a creature of opportunity, looking for women who were alone, often targeting nurses or healthcare workers, a detail that spoke to his past as an orderly. He would stalk them for weeks, learning their patterns before finding the perfect moment to strike. Melissa Harper wasn't his first victim. She was just the one who finally led the police to his door. For years, Arthur Finch had hunted in the shadows, his crimes hidden behind the disarming smile of Mr. Roberts. The arrest of Mr. Roberts sent a seismic shockwave through Fairview. The news spread like wildfire from house to house in hushed and horrified whispers. The man who brought casseroles to potlucks? The man who tended his roses with such care? It was impossible, it was unthinkable. But it was true. The police led him from his house in handcuffs, his face a blank mask, betraying no emotion. The neighbors who had gathered on their lawns watched in stunned silence, their sense of reality completely shattered. The man they had trusted for 2 decades was a monster. In the cold, sterile environment of the interrogation room, the facade of Mr. Roberts finally crumbled, and Arthur Finch emerged. At first he was defiant, silent, but as the detectives laid out the evidence, the ID card, the trophies from his basement, the fingerprints, he began to talk. He spoke in a low, detached monotone, recounting the abduction and murder of Melissa Harper with a chilling lack of remorse. He described how he had overpowered her in the park, a place he knew she would be, a place he had watched her go to for weeks. It was a confession delivered without emotion, a simple recitation of horrific facts. He had taken her to the soundproofed room in his basement, the room he had built specifically for this purpose. The details were sickening, and the detectives listened, their own humanity tested by the sheer evil sitting across from them. He admitted to everything, confirming their worst fears about what had happened to Melissa. He told them where they could find her body, in a shallow grave deep in the state forest, miles from town. He gave them the closure they sought, but it was a closure wrapped in unimaginable horror. But then, just as the confession was winding down, he said something that would ensure the community of Fairview would never truly feel safe again. He looked at the lead detective, a faint, knowing smile playing on his lips, and he whispered, "She wasn't the only one, you know. There are others, many others you'll never find." The statement hung in the air, a final taunting act of terror. He offered no more names, no more locations, just a chilling suggestion of a vast, hidden graveyard, leaving police and families of other missing women with a gnawing, unending uncertainty. The nightmare was far from over. Arthur Finch, the man they knew as Mr. Roberts, was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The trial was a formality, the evidence against him overwhelming. Justice was served, at least on paper. But for the town of Fairview, and especially for the residents of Maple Street, the verdict brought little peace. The tidy house at number 214 was sold, but it remained a monument to the horror that had lived there. New families moved in, but the shadow of what happened in that basement lingered, a permanent stain on the neighborhood. The street sign still said Maple, but it would forever be the street where the monster had lived. In the wake of their unspeakable loss, Melissa Harper's family chose to create a legacy of hope from their pain. They founded Melissa's Light, a non-profit organization dedicated to supporting the families of missing women and advocating for changes in how such cases are handled. Her mother Susan became a tireless voice for those left behind in the agonizing limbo of not knowing. The foundation provided resources, organized search efforts, and offered a community for those bound by a shared grief. Melissa's life was stolen, but her spirit lived on, a beacon for others lost in the dark. The story of Mr. Roberts became a cautionary tale, a chilling piece of local folklore whispered from one generation to the next. The trust that had once been the bedrock of the community was fractured. Neighbors looked at each other differently now, with a sliver of doubt, a hint of suspicion. A friendly wave was no longer just a friendly wave. A quiet neighbor was no longer just a quiet neighbor. The innocence of Fairview had been stolen, replaced by a hard-won, painful wisdom. The world they now knew was not as safe as it appeared from their front porches. And so the quiet suburb carries on, forever changed. The seasons turn, the grass is cut, and life continues. But there is a wariness now, a constant low-level hum of anxiety just beneath the surface. The case of Mr. Roberts serves as a terrifying and permanent reminder that evil does not always announce itself with a thunderclap. Sometimes it arrives with a gentle smile and a helping hand. It can live right next door, tend its roses, and know your name. It reminds us that the most terrifying monsters are the ones who look just like us.